everyone, this is Emmy Peterson from Expat TV. I'm also the founder of The Bridge EC Relocation. Today I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce you to Jane Nguyen, who's our lovely guest on Expat TV today. She's an author, speaker, and transformational relationship and dating coach. Jane's also the go-to girl for people who want to experience transformational change in their relationships. Using her signature feminine power coaching method in her programs, workshops, and retreats, Jane teaches strong, independent, and powerful women how to tap more into their feminine essence and shine from the inside and out, to attract a man and a relationship that allows them to be all they can be. Jane is a proud author of her book Honeymoon Forever and a contributing author of no more than 3 other books that bring love, light, and inspiration to our world. So thank you so much, the lovely Jane, for being with us today on Expat TV. I'm so excited to chat to you today, and we're going to talk about relationships, which is a big passion of yours. And the topic you and I, we've sort of gotten a lot of questions from people that we know about the fact that, you know, we're both expats, we've lived overseas for a long time. And the whole concept of cross-cultural relationships are getting bigger and bigger today. People travel more, they meet their partner in a different country. So I'd be really keen for you to share a little bit about your experience today, if you wouldn't mind, around your relationship and how that has sort of come into your life.
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's been such a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure talking to you, Emmy. So in the space of relationship, and in particular dating someone from a different culture, there's a lot of dynamics that come in play. And you know, personally for me, dating, so I'm Vietnamese, my husband is Australian. And so dating someone from a different culture, the first thing that, you know, bring up a lot of often challenges for people is, first of all, the language barrier. Yeah. So it just depends on, and it really depends on how you learn to communicate with each other and what are your rules around communication. Because I remember when we were first dating, there's a lot of things that I translate in Vietnamese make complete sense. And then when I talk in English, he was like, what? That sounds really rude. And I'm like, really? And so that sort of language barrier occasionally came in play, and it's about having that playfulness and understanding and the space to actually talk things out and explain yourself sometimes. The second of all is the lifestyle. You know, I came here at the age of 14 and sort of being all independent by myself, merging with someone who's from a different background, from a different culture, and sort of merge that lifestyle and understand our differences. Used to be a challenge for us to continue to talk and communicate about what's acceptable in my culture and what's not in his, and how to actually come to a compromise and have a better understanding moving forward. I think that's the 2 key things. Family does come in play, and there's a lot of traditional, I guess, Vietnamese expectations when it comes to relationship. For example, my parents didn't like the fact that I was living with him before marriage, and in our culture, it was a taboo to do so. So there was a lot of challenges around the traditions. Yeah. And then, you know, you talk about how in Australian culture or Western culture in general, living together is sort of a must before you get married. You got to sort of test the car before you buy it. So you sort of had that understanding, having that understanding that we're so different, and that there's no point trying to win the arguments. It's actually about understanding and merging the 2 cultures to make it work. It's a win-win for both.
That's so exciting. I mean, you touched on a few really interesting key things that, you know, I've experienced myself. I'm obviously Swedish, as most of my viewers would know, and I've had my recent partner was Australian as well, and I've actually dated a few people from various different cultures, most of them Western though. So I find it really cool that you touch on the traditional element, because a lot of people think that tradition is mainly when the cultures are very widely apart.
Yeah.
But actually, I found, being Swedish and my partner being Australian, and it doesn't sound like those two cultures would be hugely different in terms of values and tradition, but there were actually more little glitches in our relationship than I would ever imagine because of it. Because it was things like how we celebrate Christmas, or, you know, the traditional type of food we eat. And I think people very rarely expect that when they go into a relationship. They think like, oh, you know, the person I'm dating, they've moved to my country, so, you know, I don't have to worry, they're going to adjust all to my stuff. But I guess it's one thing I think is really cool about international and intercultural relationships is the fact that you kind of take the best of both worlds and put them together and kind of blend however you're going to do Australian Vietnamese in your household. Or, you know, in my case, mixing the Swedish in. So that's pretty cool. How did you find it when it came to language? Like, did you ever feel like you were quite misunderstood by your partner? Or how did you cope with the actual learning of English and understanding the nuances, I guess, of the language as well?
Great question, Emily. Because like when I first came here, I didn't speak any English, as you know. So it has been a continuous journey for me to learn and understand English. And even sometimes I say things, people get what I meant, but it wasn't the right way. And it was for me, and it happens. And I think at first, for a lot of people who have the language barrier, I think the easiest way that they will approach it is to actually really take things personally and think that people are rude or they're attacking them. And over time, I learned that I just have to be open and curious. And I guess sometimes you just got to laugh at yourself, you know, for the things that you say.
Yeah.
And because I remember, like, we had a joke ages ago, because at first, when we first learned English, you know, hot dog, I actually think it's the dog that's warm, you know. I didn't realise, because in Vietnamese, that's what it meant.
Yeah.
So you sort of didn't realise sort of there's so many cultural differences. And when it comes to simple things is food, communicating about food is always the hardest for me, because there's Vietnamese food, and sort of when you start cooking, you sort of go, I need that ingredient and this ingredient, and he would have no clue what I'm talking about. And he was like, do you mean this? I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And so it's about, like I said, you know, being curious and understand that sometimes you will be misunderstood, and it's okay. They're not attacking you. And for, I think, the Australian culture, sometimes when you really like some people, you sort of make fun of them. And so when you understand part of the culture, you go, you know what, you actually really like me, otherwise you wouldn't be bothered. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I remember ages back when I first moved overseas, when I was about 19, I lived in America for a while in California, and I remember dating this American guy, and culturally the biggest difference for me was exactly what you said about curiosity, because he was so curious and so inquisitive about my culture that it was almost too much the other way.
Yeah.
I remember because obviously he'd lived in America most of his life, he'd travelled a little bit, but not a lot internationally. So he had very little awareness, I guess, of Swedish culture, or even, you know, Scandinavian culture in general, which has some similarities. And I remember we were on this one date, and he was so curious, and he just kept asking me questions, and it was the funniest thing. And so, I mean, I think there's a fine balance there about the curiosity, but like you say, especially, I guess, around the language and having that playfulness, both from your end being the one who's possibly moved and the other person who's already possibly living in that country.
Yeah.
One thing I'm really curious about from your end, because you work a lot with couples and people in relationships, how do you reckon people can go about? So, for example, I spoke to a client a while ago, and she had moved to a new country and met a partner there. He hadn't travelled much at all, and had very little understanding of her culture. And whereas she really liked the guy, she was feeling like he wasn't really embracing that part of her or that side of her. So if we've got any viewers out there who are in the, the early stages of dating, like how can they bring their partner along and get them excited about, finding out more about the culture that made them come in the first place? Does that make sense?
Yes, it's a great topic to start thinking about, because say, for example, Australia's got a mix of cultures and so much diversity of ethnicity and people and language and lifestyle. And so it's quite common for, I guess, people to be open to those diversity. However, for people in other countries who've never been outside of, where they lived, it's an uncommon thing for them to embrace new challenges or new change. And I think I look at, I guess, our relationship, and in the first stages, I talk a lot about our culture, sort of what's different. And I got really excited sharing that. I think the excitement sort of got him excited.
Okay.
So first you need, and I guess there shouldn't be any pressure of how long it should take for the person to embrace fully the culture or the differences. It should be just an open discussion and continuous learning and journey of growth for them. Because look, we all know that we are afraid of changes. For a lot of people, changes are scary. So sort of embracing that part you just got to have the patience to realize that it may take them 6 months, 12 months, or a year, or even more. We've been together nearly 7 years, and he's still learning a lot about Vietnamese culture. And it's hard unless you completely immerse yourself and living in that country for like 12 months. So it's about, everyday life to introduce little by little and have the patience to explain and share what's really, the core differences. So that would be my tip.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Jane. And having watched you and Rod as a couple for a long time, it's extraordinary. And I remember at your wedding, he held a speech in Vietnamese, which I thought was extraordinary. Now, I don't speak Vietnamese, so I don't know how his pronunciation was. But the gesture of love and what he did for you and your culture and your family being there, I think was absolutely beautiful. And I loved what you said as well before about the whole introducing the culture little by little, because I had a conversation with a friend of mine not long ago, and she was fairly new in a relationship with a guy, again from another culture to her, and because he hadn't traveled much and showed very little interest in her culture, she was getting very frustrated. And so we spoke about it, and I said, well, the meaning that you put on this, that he's not asking, i.e. he doesn't care, if you make it mean that, you're actually restricting his ability to interact with you and your culture. So I said to her, what if it's actually not about him not caring? What if it's about him feeling, I'm not enough here, I haven't traveled as much as she has? What if it's actually about some kind of fear of not being quite enough for your woman or your son? And it was really interesting because the conversation went a whole different direction after that. And I found it really, really cool, because her being a very enlightened, powerful, energetic woman, it hadn't even crossed her mind that could be the case. And isn't that very common, that we make something mean something in our mind without really fully understanding the other person?
I think having that open conversation to really ask the question, how do you, like when we first traveled to Vietnam, there was a big culture shock for Rod. He hasn't been to many, Asian countries, and, with Vietnamese cultures, like traffic's everywhere. It's really loud, noisy, polluted. And they're just, tons of food everywhere, and just people just go in your face and start selling you things. And I remember when we first traveled to Vietnam, like I was excited. I'm like, oh my God, it'll be awesome, because you then learn a lot quicker because you're there. But then I had to remind myself that I actually sort of need to keep the excitement to myself, because he would have felt overwhelmed when everything was happening. So instead of bombarded him with, more exciting stuff, I actually just have to check in with him, like, how are you feeling? Are you okay with this? And if there's something that he's not comfortable, to actually raise his voice and go, you know, I'm not quite sure about this. Can you sort of explain it to me what it means?
Yeah.
And it really tested our relationship, especially when you travel together. It's like either makes or breaks a relationship, because you learn to test each other's boundaries. And culture comes in play, and you sort of, I guess, behave in a way that you naturally will do instead of how you think you should behave.
Yeah.
And for him, I remember at one point he was like, this is just too much, and he just freaked out. And it's okay, calm down. And occasionally he felt like, you know what, I love your culture, I love the food, but I'm actually missing mine. And we was like, okay, that's cool, we just go to McDonald's. And so
good solution.
And I think it's sort of because there's a lot of mixed culture already in Vietnam. There's a lot more Western companies coming in. So it was easy for us to sort of go dive into the Vietnamese culture, and if he found it's too much, we just go, you know, let's just go to Western food, or, you know, let's go watch a movie. So he can actually feel like he wasn't just alone in this country with all these Lao Vietnamese people.
Yeah. I think you're touching on something really important there when it comes to taking your partner back to your country of origin if you are living overseas, because even though the Vietnamese and the Swedish culture is so different, it's actually quite interesting, because I remember a few times, and you would have probably encountered this with your husband Rod, you're sitting around a table with people from your home country and they're all speaking their native tongue, which is only natural because they want to catch up with you. They're so excited to see you. They're so excited that you brought your partner along, and they just forget that that person does not understand your language. So with a lot of us, you know, if we are living overseas and we're with a partner in that other country, we speak their language pretty much fluently very often. But, I mean, Vietnamese or Swedish is not usually essential to function in Australia, which means that our partners they might understand the odd word of, you know, water or bathroom or whatever, but they won't understand a whole sentence. And I remember my partner, when we went back to Sweden, my grandmother, who's actually 102 this year, she's an extraordinary woman, obviously doesn't speak any English, was never taught English at school. And she actually made an effort of speaking to him, to his face in Swedish, whilst I translated. So he still felt like she was speaking to him. But it did take him a while to get used to that, because I remember him saying it's very frustrating that I don't understand what people are saying. I feel a bit like I'm walking around in this language bubble, and I'm cursing myself for not learning more languages at school.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience are around that. Have you had similar things?
It was exactly the same. At times he felt sort of, you know, sort of our place, because we were sort of talking in Vietnamese at, you know, at the dining table, or, you know, we were catching up with friends. And so, but occasionally what I encourage him is just, you know, whatever words he knows, just give it a go, you know, just say something funny. And people laugh in a way that the fact that he had the courage to learn the, you know, the Vietnamese language. It's not an easy language to learn, and I'm sure with, you know, Swedish as well. It's not easy. So people actually feel flattered the fact that he gave it a go. And for us, I always try to translate as much as possible, but sometimes with jokes it's hard. You know, the sense of humour, the Vietnamese humour is completely different to the Australian one. So when you translate, he will be like, why is it even funny? You know, so I'll just tell him, it's just Vietnamese joke, you won't understand. But I'll try to translate as much as possible. And I think for him, just have that patience and curiosity to immerse in that culture, and you pick up little by little every day. And when you're in the country, like whenever we go shopping, I always encourage him to bargain. It's the quickest way to learn, and you sort of felt like you are part of the culture when you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really great tips, and I think we keep coming back to that curiosity and the patience, and you know, obviously you do love each other in the first place, that's why you're together, and to, I guess, you know, not allow the fact that you're from different places and you were born in very different parts of the world, that shouldn't stop you being together now. I love this topic, so I really want to leave our viewers with your top tips. So if someone is in a relationship with someone or about to go into a relationship with someone from another culture, what are your 2 or 3 top things that they absolutely must do to be as happy as possible together?
I think so when you go on a date and you know the person's from a different culture, first of all, I would say to be curious about the different kind of expectations when it comes to relationship and culture, and be curious and ask sort of upfront in a light-hearted way, we do it this way in terms of, say, for example, marriage or, family tradition, how do you do it in your culture? And you sort of have a quick understanding of how big the difference is. And you then can judge for yourself whether this is the path you want to go down, or, you're happy to sort of go, you know what, this is not the right person for me. I'll just go for another person. When you're together, I think you've got to have the open conversations around different things. For example, food, such a vital part of everyday life. And you sort of think about when you start living together, who's cooking what, how many times we have Vietnamese food compared to Australian food. And is it okay for you to do that? Or is there any changes that need to be made? Who's helping who? What about family boundaries? Sometimes, I guess, with Vietnamese culture, we're such a family-oriented unit that family does have a lot of input into our daily lives, and so you've got to have the clear rules and boundaries around it's okay and what is not, and always clear on your own boundaries. And I guess always share your opinion, your thoughts around whether you're comfortable with certain things, because otherwise you just hold on and suppress the feelings and start resenting the other person for not understanding. So always have that open conversation. Last but not least, to just be curious and patient with each other. There are differences, and I think to look from the good side of things is you merging and you blending the best from both worlds, and have the curiosity to learn and grow yourself, and be patient with the other person if he or she is not learning as quick as you expect them to. And just have fun with the journey.
Yeah, that's some really great advice, Jane. I think that's really beautiful, and it's one of those things where so many people who are in relationships with someone else from another culture, there's a tendency to oversee those boundaries that you talked about. I think I've met a lot of people where they've kind of, one person sets the rules and the other one follows. And as we know, it's organic in a relationship to have a bit more of a leading role or a bit more of a following role. But I do really agree with you that I think those boundaries are especially important when it is cross-cultural. And the last thing that I've noticed in myself, having lived overseas for way over 10 years now, is the whole thing that I'm changing constantly, and the culture that I bring with me, because I've lived in Sweden, but I've also lived in America, the UK, I've lived in Australia. So I'm not a traditional Swede in all those senses. I've merged and morphed my cultures to get to where I am today. But yeah, I think, like you say, I think the one we should sign off with is certainly the curiosity, the patience, and seeing those beautiful good sides that blending two different things together means. I mean, isn't it how most awesome things were invented? You took two things that were already good and put them together and made something even better. So,
that's what children are like.
Yeah, exactly. No, they put it together. Well, thank you, Jane, so much for being on Expat TV today. We're going to leave some details on the final screen here in the video so you guys can connect with Jane, ask her a lot of questions about relationships and all that stuff. And thanks again for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane, for an amazing conversation. I trust that you as a listener enjoyed that as much as we did. I would really encourage you to connect with Jane after the call via her website that you can see on the screen in front of you right now. She's got plenty of resources, including her beautiful book, that will really help you improve your relationships on your expat journey and beyond. All the best, and I'll chat to you soon.